Yeah.
Would like to ask the audience questions. Sure.
Thank you. We are solving some issues with the capture, so that's everything I figured out.
Okay,
Started. Are you both ready?
we're ready whenever you are.
Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. My name is Maria Woodham, and I work with the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, and we are so excited to have you all here tonight. The Fireside Reading Series is the Friends' longest running program, celebrating 30 seasons in partnership with the St. Paul Public Library. Thank you for joining us in this somewhat nomadic season at the Rondo Community Library. Friends is made possible in part through an appropriation from the Minnesota State Legislature to the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library as the Minnesota Center for the Book. Books for sale this evening are kindly provided by Black Garnet, located on University Avenue. We are so grateful for your support and your presence here this evening. We will begin with a reading and then open things up for questions from you all. When we do this, please wait for myself to come with the camera linked mic to get to you. This makes it easier on our online audience and on the speakers. Friends online, we have someone in the room to relay your questions as well, so feel free to type those in the chat. I'm happy to introduce you to our two guests today. Our guest reader, Minister Rosemary Klass, a senior veterinary technician at the University of Minnesota, and author Jody Lulich.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jody Lulich, excuse me. Jody is a professor of veterinary clinical services and internal medicine at the University of Minnesota, where he holds the Osborne Hills Chair in Nephrology, Urology, and is the director of the Minnesota Urolith Center. He's a classical pianist and lives in the Twin Cities with his husband. Take it away,
Great.
Jody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome. I'm so glad to see such a, how can I say it, an audience that's just full of energy and smiles. So that makes me really feel good. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to try and bring my book alive, and not only in terms of having a small performance, but also after that sort of a short reading as well. So you get a feel for how the book, not only the content, but also the language as well. Let me go ahead and get started. So In the Company of Grace is my memoir. It's the story of a little boy who, when he loses his mother, goes on a journey to find mothering so that he can grow up into someone who can offer compassion and mothering to others. What I'd like to do is start by telling you about the mother I chose. So when I went to veterinary school, I rented a room in the home of a 75-year-old Black woman named Grace. She was generous, patient, nurturing, forgiving, and selfless. To give you an idea, every week when we went grocery shopping, she always picked up something for someone else in need. Just a wonderful example for me. Some would say that our meeting was purely chance. As I look back, it was really destined to be. I walked in the dean's office of the veterinary school and started a conversation with his secretary. I told her anyway, that I didn't want to live in a dormitory. Really, I didn't have lots of money because I told her I couldn't afford to live in an apartment. And I certainly didn't want to live, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I didn't want to live with someone who just graduated from high school when I had already been through college. We just have different ideas and plans. She then told me about Grace, a woman she lived with when she went to college. She phoned her and arranged for me to meet her that afternoon. So what I did is I walked the mile through town and up a hill until I arrived at a modest one-story bungalow with green siding and tall pine trees. I rang the bell and Grace opened it. She looked just like my grandmother, wire-rimmed glasses, an apron over her dress, and a big warm smile. She was welcoming and invited me in. The interesting thing is that the modest exterior of her house was no match for what was inside. Elegant antique furnishings, a dark wood Chippendale-style secretary, a glass curio door cabinet filled with dozens of miniature porcelain shoes. In the dining room was this large Jacobean-style great chair covered in deep red upholstery. On the top of a bookcase was a Wedgwood water pitcher with Triton sitting on the spout. Grace noticed, however, that one item in particular caught my eye. On the top of an antique Chinese carved-in table was a burled wood box. Grace went over to the box and pulled out a small brass knob. A flywheel hummed, gears turned, tines plunked, and out poured music. Almost comical at first, it had a mechanical quality, like a muted calliope. No rubato, no variation in timbre, and no waver in volume. Then Grace opened the lid. You want to wind that up? There we go. Then Grace opened the lid. The melody poured over the brim and filled the room. A sweet, harmonious sound, a nostalgic sound, an old lilting tune that reminded me of my mother. In the beginning, Grace and I had a typical landlord-tenant relationship. It was considerate and polite. But all that changed the night when she asked me,
Jody, would you braid my hair?
Grace was a proud woman. She was particular about her appearance. She had a routine. Each night before going to bed, she set out her clothes, cleaned and moisturized her face, and pinned up her hair. When she asked me to braid her hair, she looked down at her hands and gave each one a light caress with the other. The joints on her fingers were swollen. From the expression on her face and the way she closed her eyes, I could see that she was in pain. Good thing that I went to summer camp as a child and learned how to braid thin plastic cords into keychains. I never knew that such a skill would come in handy one day. And that day, it did. With that simple act, our relationship changed. As I braided her hair, she would tell me the stories of growing up in the Depression, having her mother move to Alabama just before Grace entered high school. Her grandmother had to finish raising her in upstate New York. Grace also told me what it was like being a Black woman in the time of segregation and the Jim Crow laws of the South. As I braided her hair, she wove her life into mine, and I was in awe.
They want to know if I'm going to my 50th reunion.
Who wants to know?
And actually, it's my 55th reunion. Cornell University.
Grace graduated from Cornell University in 1930. Cornell University, well, that's amazing. Of course you should go. Grace looked up at me, raised her eyebrows, and wrinkled her forehead as if I had said something terribly wrong. Obviously, there was more to this than just the invitation. Grace grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York in the early 1900s. After achieving one of the highest scores on New York State's standardized high school exam, she received a four-year scholarship to Cornell University. Grace was thrilled to attend such a prestigious university. But when she arrived, she wasn't prepared for the social isolation of being Black at Cornell, as this early photograph shows. Sage Hall at Cornell University was the women's dormitory.
I had expected to live in the dormitory with the other students. To my dismay, Cornell did not permit Blacks to live in the dormitory. On my first day, I waited for hours to be escorted to the Black community in a little corner of Ithaca. There, I stayed in a house with other female Black students. My disappointment could not be covered up.
Grace went to the Dean of Women to protest, only to find out that it was the Dean of Women who constructed the segregation rules and saw that they were upheld. The Dean of Women had a major influence over Cornell's president.
How dare that squat, big-hipped woman in that floppy Black dress tell me where I did and did not belong? I made it quite clear to the Dean of Women that someone important would hear about this. I went straight to the president. He informed me that integration had been tried in the past, but it failed. To make me feel better, he said that there was a quota on Jews. I internally murmured, and a ban on Blacks.
Before graduating from Cornell, Grace sought the help of the Women's Cosmopolitan Club. They surveyed the female students in Sage Hall, the women's dormitory. In your hand, on the inside of your program, you have a copy of that original newspaper clipping that Grace held onto all these years. I was surprised when she showed it to me because it was very important to her, and you can see how wrinkled it is from where it looks. Let me tell you the part that troubled Grace the most. Those objected to Negroes living in the dormitory on account of sanitary reasons, lower standards of living, social inferiority, intermarriage, and dishonesty.
I was heartbroken. I hoped that my teachers did not feel the same. I had just as much right to the same education at Cornell as all the rest of them. But some of them did not see it that way. Jody, what do you think? Should I go to my reunion?
I kept quiet. I already knew that Grace had made up her mind. She was not setting foot on Cornell's campus anytime soon. Having grown up in the Midwest, I had never experienced the South before. That year, many things were new to me beyond my wildest imagination. The Southern architecture was stunning and so warm. The kudzu and the way it covered the trees was mythical, like living in a fairy tale. And the food was unique, but not always to my liking.
No.
Yeah, it's grits and shrimp, not always to my liking. But one thing frightened me. In March 21 of 1981, a 19-year-old Black man was found hanging from a tree with a noose around his neck in Mobile, Alabama. He had been beaten and his throat slashed. Adjacent to this infamous tree was the home of Benny Jack Hayes, a high-ranking official of the United Klan of America. The police ignored this juxtaposition and assumed a drug deal had gone wrong and instead arrested 3 men hawking illegal drugs who also lived close. That evening, when I braided Grace's hair, I asked what she thought of the hanging. Do you think those 3 men killed him and hung his body from a tree? The prolonged silence that followed was so thick that I could feel the temperature in the room rise. That was when I realized that this was a modern-day lynching of a Black man. The stuff I read about in history books and thought could never happen in my lifetime, but just did. For the next few nights, I braided Grace's hair in almost complete silence. When anything was said, Grace did most of the talking. That was what a fine, all I could think about, and I couldn't stop thinking about it, was a fine job her mother had done in raising her. While at the same time, I was missing my mother.
The first time I came to Tuskegee was to visit my mother in the summer of 1930, right after graduating from college.
Grace's mother moved to Tuskegee in 1922 to teach Braille and reading to Black veterans who were blinded or traumatized by the war. She called it bibliotherapy and received appreciation from notables like Eleanor Roosevelt and many others.
My trip? Oh, my trip. My mother secured a Pullman train ticket. A Pullman ticket meant that I would have the best accommodations and comforts for the long journey from New York to Alabama. Halfway through the journey, after the train departed Washington, D.C.'s Union Station, I was asked, like all the other Blacks, to move to the Jim Crow car. And it's in the front, behind the locomotive. It was a habit of mine that when I experienced segregation, I suddenly became deaf. I ignored the conductor's request to move. One should not accept such demeaning arrangements without first providing some difficulty. I was asked to give up my seat again and again. Finally, I acquiesced and got up and made my way, albeit begrudgingly, to the Jim Crow car. I was not happy. Then one of the steam lines broke in the Jim Crow car. Water was seeping in, and the smoke was annoying. I asked the porter if there was another car available. At first, he ignored me. Then I stood up in the center of the car and began gathering the attention of the other passengers, all of whom were Black. I encouraged them to band together and complain to our various NAACP organizations. I shouted, our health was being jeopardized, especially those who had little babies. When the train stopped at the next station, the porter returned and asked me to follow him. I heard about people who were thrown off the train for protesting. I worried that it was going to be me and my turn. I worried that something bad was going to happen to me. But instead, I was escorted out and onto a brand new Pullman car all by myself for the rest of the ride.
What an amazing first year for me. I went home for summer break, but was very eager to return. When I did, Grace had a surprise for me. I walked up the stairs to the front door. When she opened the door, I was dumbfounded. No, I was hoodwinked. Grace had cut her hair short. I thought that our closeness would be ruined, but I'm happy to say I was wrong. Grace and I would spend every night eating dinner together, laughing and sharing stories for the rest of my time at Tuskegee. 4 years of veterinary school went by very quickly. After my graduation, I delayed my trip home to help Grace in her recovery from hip replacement surgery. But we both knew that soon I would have to leave. I accepted an internship at the University of Minnesota with an expected arrival date at the end of June. For both of us, time would pass too quickly. It would be extremely difficult for Grace and me to say goodbye, but we tried not to think about it much. On the morning of my departure, I got up early after I finished packing. After brushing my teeth and getting dressed, I quickly made my way to the front of the house. I wanted to surprise Grace, but instead, she surprised me. When I looked around the corner at the antique music box, I noticed a large red bow fastened to its lid.
You have to take it with you.
I can't. The music box was your mother's. You enjoy it as much as I do.
In my will, it's yours.
When that time comes, I'll take great care of it.
You have to take it now. It means more to me to see you enjoy it while I'm alive than to know you will own it after I'm dead. Of all the students who have lived in this house with me, I'll miss you the most.
I looked at Grace with immense appreciation as tears streamed down my cheeks. Although I had moved to Minnesota, at Christmas I came home to spend it with Grace. However, Grace was quickly reaching a stage in her life where she could no longer live independently. Janet, who lived in Tuskegee, was a good friend to Grace and me. She helped me move her into a nursing home. Grace was not there long. On April 23rd, 2001, she peacefully died at the age of 90. After her death, her body mysteriously disappeared. I would find out later that she willed her body to the University of Alabama's medical school to teach medical students. After that, she was cremated. That was another surprise for me. So I went on a hunt to find her ashes. And when I found them, I brought an airline ticket to Ithaca, New York. I had a plan. On a beautiful spring morning, I stood on the front lawn of Sage Hall, a dormitory built in 1875 to house women students attending Cornell University. The building was just as Grace had described it. Sitting on top of a grassy hill was an impressive crimson red brick building with the Witch's Tower in the center above its entrance. The tower reminded me of Grace's description of the Dean of Women. The tower was capped by a steep, pointed black roof. As I looked up, I imagined Grace feeling sad and unwanted. Grace also described a peaceful, meandering creek behind Sage Hall. I walked around the building and sat down on one of the benches at the edge of the creek. That is where I emptied half of Grace's ashes down the bank, and they tumbled into the water. Suddenly, a strong wind buffeted against my body. Some of Grace's ashes were picked up by the wind, spreading them over the sidewalk and up the street. I should have buried them, I thought, but seeing the ashes rise in the wind, I knew they were going to those places that brought Grace, both honor and anguish. The next day, I got back on a plane, this time landing in Atlanta, Georgia. I rented a car and drove to Tuskegee, Alabama. I buried Grace's remaining ashes at the base of her grave marker where her mother and stepfather rested. Before returning to the airport, I drove past the house on Bibb Street. I looked up at the house and thought, what a wonderful time in my life. I will never forget you, Grace. Well, now that I've told you about Grace, what I'd really like to do is also tell you about my real mother. She wasn't perfect. In fact, she wasn't even close, but I loved her just the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read chapter 15, and then at that time, we'll go ahead and take some questions. That's okay. The day after her funeral, I walked past my parents' bedroom door. Then I slowly turned around and walked back. This time I stopped. I peered in. The bed was made, the bed covers were smooth, and the corners neatly tucked. The floor was clean and the closet doors were closed. No one had slept in that room for several days or nights, not even my father. I wanted the light entering the room to be warm, to pour through the window in rays of amber and gold and lift me and cradle me and wash me in memory. I wanted the room to smell like my mother, her warm jasmine tea and her favorite hand cream. I wanted the room to feel the way it used to, like someone I cared for, who cared for me, still lived here. But it was in the middle of January. January in Chicago was cold, and the sky was gray, and the light was harsh, and it plunged through the window in shades of metallic gray. The light pushing through the curtains was frigid and empty and revealed that everything that belonged to my mother and reminded me of her was gone. I walked in and stood in front of her closet. I slid the door open. The closet was empty. Standing there, I imagined how it was once filled with her dresses and her coats and her shoes and my favorite hiding places. Who took all her clothes, I wondered. 5 days before, I saw my aunts, all 4 of her sisters, sifting through her dresses. When they were done, they took only one, the muted pink dress, the dress with pleats, the small waist, and the long hem, the dress that smelled like my mother and her favorite perfume. I watched her put on that dress. She'd lift it over her head and slip into it from the bottom and slide the fabric down over her hips. She'd fasten the belt around her waist and looked into the mirror, swinging her body from side to side. Then she'd smile, reach down and hug me so tightly that my body would rise up against hers and my feet would lift from the floor. I knew where that dress was. Her sisters also knew that she loved her dress. That was the dress. That was why they buried her in it. But what about her gray dress and her green dress and all the other dresses? And where was her soft pink sweater, the one that I'd lean into when sitting next to her on the couch? Where were her shoes? The white tennis shoes that she wore when we walked to Lake Michigan to watch the sunrise over the rippling waves. The sand bogged down our pace as we walked over the shore. She held my hand, my arm outstretched out between us as I tried to keep up. Before entering the house, she would take off those shoes and shake out the sand. She'd carry them in her hand and casually walk up the stairs and into the house in her stocking feet. I'd take off my shoes, shake out the sand, and follow her up the stairs. Who took her sandals, the one with the gold straps and the flat bottoms? She really liked those shoes. She would paint her toenails bright red when she wore those shoes. She'd ditch the socks and rub lotion all over her feet and her ankles, and then up her legs as far as she could reach. She had a way of walking in those sandals. It was carefree. Her hips were loose. When she walked, the bottom of those sandals would flop down and hit the pavement with a slap, and then flop up and hit the soles of her feet with a clap. I expected her to cha-cha or mambo down the sidewalk in those shoes. Who took her sandals? Where are her serious shoes, the black dress shoes, the ones with the pointed toes and the tall, skinny heels? If I put my feet in those shoes and tried to stand, I would fall sideways into her, and she'd catch me and tell me to put them back in the closet. When she wore those shoes, I knew to fetch her perfume and hand it to her. I would reach in her top dresser drawer and find her pearl necklace and matching earrings. She looked so beautiful with her shoulder-length hair tucked behind her ears. I knew not to step on those shoes or smear her makeup when she reached down to kiss me goodbye. I rushed to the dresser. Where was her perfume? It was supposed to be here in the glass bottle on the top of her dresser. Her hairbrush and her hand mirror were missing too. I pulled open the top drawer. Nothing. Not her pearl necklace, not her slim, delicate silver wristwatch, and none of her jewelry. Not even the spare buttons from her coat. Everything was gone. No nylons, no underwear, no pajamas, no loose bobbing pins. How am I going to survive without her? I knelt down and dropped my body over the edge of the bed. I remembered how I'd whisper her name to wake her up when I could not sleep. She would pull me under the covers, and we would both sleep until morning. I lay down on the bed in my usual spot, which was next to her, the place I slept when I was frightened or lonely, the place I slept when my father worked the midnight shift to make sure that she was not frightened or lonely, I would tell her. I would lie next to her and press my back into her belly. So I rounded my back, moving it in the direction where she would have been. She would wrap her body around mine, and I would feel her warmth and her love. So I lifted the covers and placed them over me. She would rest her chin on the top of my head. So I scrunched her pillow and pressed it snugly against the top of my head. She would wrap her arms around my chest and pull me in so close. So I wrapped my arms around my chest as tight as I could. But it wasn't the same. I didn't feel warm. I didn't feel protected. I felt alone. She was never coming back. Each time I said it, I trembled. She was never coming back. Never coming back. I lay there for a long while. Then I turned on my side and stared into the empty closet. I slowly drew up my knees, transforming my body into a huge question mark. Who would have taken all of her things out of my life? As if she had never existed, and as if I didn't want to remember.
Oh.
Thank you.
Now we will turn over to questions.
Great.
And we'll have questions that they would like to ask.
Yes. Do you have any Kleenex? Oh, gosh.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yes.
Could you say something?
Wait for her to come to you.
Could you say something about your education before you went south to Tuskegee?
Sure. So in terms of my education, I went to public school in Chicago. I graduated from high school out of Lindblom, and if I don't know if anyone's from Chicago, it may not matter, but they're like, you are. So there's like Lane Tech and Lindblom Tech. So Lindblom Tech took them from the south and west sides, and I think Lane took them from the other, and they were more special high schools. And I lived in the Hyde Park Kenwood neighborhood in Chicago, which is right near the University of Chicago. And I think as a child, I was so frightened of leaving home, even though that was probably the best thing for me. I wanted to go to the University of Chicago, but they didn't accept me. But I did go to Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. And then I went south to Tuskegee, which was really wonderful. It was such a wonderful place because it was a different sense of community. Like when we had exams, even though they were medicine exams, there would always be questions like, who's the president of the university and who started the university? So they made sure that you had this sense of family that I didn't get at other universities, even when I went to the University of Minnesota. No one ever did that for me. But then I came back to the University of Minnesota, again, doing an internship, a residency, and I had a PhD as well. I did all that at the University of Minnesota and then stayed on and became a professor at the veterinary college, which is what I do now. So it's a long route, but it's a typical route for a veterinarian or any medical professional.
I wonder if you could talk about the process through which you ended up deciding on veterinary medicine as a way to.
Oh, yeah. So that's believe it or not, that's really in the book. It is in the book, but I will tell you about the process then. I don't know. I just want to make sure we have time. So let me read the prologue to you, and you'll get the whole sense. But the prologue starts it out really well. Can I read it? I should just ask. Okay. January 14th, 2012. As the lights went down over the audience and up on the stage, my heart raced, and not in a good way. I was one of several veterinarians being honored that evening. I sat in the front row in a dark blue suit, starched white shirt, and blue tie. The room was cold, but I was overheating. My eyeglasses fogged over. I squinted, but could only make out hazy beams of white light fanning down from the ceiling to the stage floor. I shifted my arms away from the sides of my body to dissipate the heat. I took off my glasses, wiped them clean. I turned around and looked behind me. Every seat in the auditorium was filled. Many in the audience I knew, and many of them thought they knew me. In my hand, I held a single sheet of paper. On one side, I had written the speech I wanted to tell. I became a veterinarian because the doctor who cared for my sick dog was gentle and patient. At a young age, I knew I wanted to be just like him. On the other side of the paper, I had written the speech I needed to tell. When I was a little boy, my mother committed suicide. As my father drove to the funeral, a dog darted out from an alley. He ran in our direction. It was an accident, but our car hit him. The crumpling sound as the tires ran over its body jolted me hard against the back seat over the back of the passenger seat. I squeezed my eyes shut and slowly lowered my head into my hands because I could have prevented it. I was torn between my past and the present, between what I was expected to say and how I became the man I am today. I no longer wanted to lie, but ashamed of the truth, I told no one. I turned the paper over and over. Which speech do I tell? I needed to decide soon before my name was called. So that's how the book begins. And that's sort of how I got on that track of veterinary medicine, where the things that happened in my life, and also knowing how I felt when I lost my mother, how that dog's family must have felt when they lost their dog. And so part of the things I did, mentally being aware of it or not, is I vowed to make it better. So that's how I became a veterinarian.
So I read your book last month and really enjoyed it. And I was wondering what your thoughts were. I mean, obviously you became, growing up in the same household and circumstances with your brother, you became a deeply compassionate person.
Yeah.
And it sounds like perhaps he did not. Like, do you have any relationship with your brother, or do you have any idea what
Yeah.
was it that helped you to become the person you are now, and potentially, coming from those same circumstances gave him less of that?
Yeah, boy, that's really hard to explain. So I don't know. I don't know, but you're right. So for those of you who haven't read the book, we sort of took different paths. In fact, we still don't get along very well. And it was very interesting because when also in the book, when my father was getting old, I sort of went to him and I said, I don't need anything. I don't need anything, but you really need to teach my brother, who is older than I am, to take care of himself, because for whatever reason, he didn't do those things. And when my father died, he left everything in my name, which meant I now had to take care of my brother, and which I do. So he lives in Chicago, so I'm glad there's distance between us, right or wrong. I mean, I try and be very nice, but I think he's just had a harder time realizing it. So how did I turn out differently? I don't know. I just think it was very kind people who sort of helped me through it and helped me see it. It's not to say that I didn't go through difficult times. I was a very cynical child. I worked very hard, but I was a very cynical child. And my brother was a little bit different way. Believe it or not, when my brother was young, he was so smart that they were whisking him off to places because his IQ was so high for special education. But then somewhere along the line, when he hit high school and had to actually work, I don't think he knew how to do it because he was just so smart that he never had to do it before. But there becomes a time in your life when you have to do those things and be responsible. So I don't know. I guess my father made, I think, the right decision. He didn't make my life easy, but I think he made the right decision. So you're right. So those are just the things, and it's funny because some people tell me, well, you should just, just leave your brother or leave him alone. And I said, but I don't do that for my canine patients. How could I treat my brother worse than I would treat a dog? So yeah, so we still don't get along very well. But it's okay, right? You do what you can. That's life. I tell people it takes everyone in the world for it to really work. And when I think about our lives, I think that we are equally damaged. We're just equally damaged on different spectrums, but we're probably equally damaged.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
I read the book. And I'd like to know, are you still that 9-year-old boy? Do you
No.
still go
Oh,
in and
God.
out of him when you need to?
Yeah. Of course, you probably know the answer to that already,
I
just the way
don't.
I'm reading it. Well, the answer is yes. So I do. I mean, that's a part of your life that you don't let go of. And someone said, I think before I started, they said that they cried reading the book, and I said I cried writing the book. And so the answer is yes. There are those difficult times, and sometimes it catches me off guard. And I realize that yes, I'm feeling those things that maybe I couldn't express when I was 9, and they're being expressed now. So the answer is yes, I do go back to those times.
Okay, but you can work him wherever you need.
I'm not sure that I can control it. You make it sound like it's easy.
No,
but I don't. But it's not. It's not easy. So the answer is yes. I get into those situations, and it becomes very difficult again.
Okay.
And so the answer is yes. So I mean, I choose how I respond. So I think what people don't realize is that I started this book to honor Grace because she didn't have any kids and very few relatives, and I did not want her life to go unnoticed. But in terms of writing this book, I realized that I was really writing it for me. And if I didn't write this book, I don't think that I would have the peace that I have right now. And so hopefully you feel that in the book, and some things people don't realize. So I have to. Sometimes I wish I had written an author's note, because I know when you read, it really depends upon where you are in your life. But I always have to tell people that when I've read my book many times, and I read portions of it right before I come to see you guys, is that I think one of the biggest messages out of my book, which is a universal message, and you've heard it other ways in different ways, is that our greatest freedom is the ability to choose how we respond to adversity. But with that freedom, what you need to know is that your response needs to be thoughtful and authentic. And it needs to be thoughtful because otherwise you can't get the world to change. If it's just about you and you're screaming, and there's nothing wrong with screaming because we're emotional. It's okay to scream, but it's not okay to scream your entire life, because that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't even help you. So it needs to be thoughtful if you're going to change the world, and it needs to be inclusive. And the other thing is that it needs to be authentic. It needs to be who you are, because if it's not authentic, then the world doesn't know who to love.
Mhm.
And
Well,
so
I'm
they're
glad you're
living.
here
Thank you.
to spread your message.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. It's an important message.
it's very
Especially
important.
today,
You're
it's
here
an
for a
important
reason.
message.
Everybody's here for a reason. And I'm
Yeah.
glad that you found that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm going to come up to the front. We're first going to do an online question. It was
Okay.
asked at the beginning. What about being a vet has surprised you the most over the years, either positive or negative?
What has surprised me? Well, two things have. I think the students surprised me how hard they work and how compassionate they are. Right? That's really good. The clients surprised me because for them to be able to give so much to something that is, how can I say, to a living being that, can't take care of itself and whole life, it just amazes me. It just amazes me. And then I think the other thing that surprised me, just like joy and grief, is that we're individuals and we approach them in different ways, and we need to step back and listen. Because, I'm always amazed at that, you go and see your vet sometimes, and right or wrong, or you go and see your doctor or anyone else, and they sort of have this prescription of what they're going to do. But what you need to realize is they're prescribing it based on them. It's like me saying, I wear these glasses, they work perfect for me. Here, why don't you take them? You can see very well with them. But that's not what it is. So it's really, I've learned to step back and sort of listen and realize that my answers may not be your answers, or may not even be the right answers. So it really takes your time to do that. So we need to step back. And in this society where we're always so angry and we're screaming and we're doing it, sometimes we need to just step back and listen, so that we can make a good decision instead of just a reaction. And like I said, we are human, so we do react. But once we scream and get that out of us, we need to step back and say, now, how can I be thoughtful? Or how can I make a difference? Or why was this important? Or, and so we need to learn to step back instead of just always screaming and answer positively. Sure.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here, and I am so appreciative of all the work that you've done
thank you.
on behalf
you.
of all of the people that, are compassionate with animals and
Yeah.
people, which
Yeah.
I am very much so. Also, my niece, I mentioned that I was coming tonight, and she said, he's brilliant, because she was one of your students.
Thank
and
you. Oh, well,
so
thank
Jen
you. Yeah, I love
Berger.
my students. Like I said, they're really good. They're so
So
dedicated.
she was excited for me to be able to meet you. So again,
thank you
just
for
thank
coming.
you for choosing this career, because
Thank
it's so
you.
important. It means so much to everybody to have animals in their lives.
It is. It is. Good.
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge that it takes a lot of inner strength and courage to choose the path that you have.
Thank you.
And I'm a therapist, and I know that anytime somebody who is struggling hears a story like yours, it's extremely validating, not just
Thank
to their
you.
own experience,
Yeah.
but that they can live through it and come out the other side.
Yeah.
So thank you for being a good example for all of us. in that
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. Thank you. It's true. I mean, sometimes I have to tell my students too that, and I didn't make this up. I may have rephrasing it, but learning is progress. It's not perfection. It's progress. And so we need to think about it that way, that we need to keep moving forward. It's progress.
And I wanted to end with a very lighthearted question. I wondered if you currently had any pets.
Oh, yeah, I do. So I have two small dogs at home. As I've gotten older, small dogs are easier, because there's less poop to pick up in the backyard. And when it's cold, like we were a week ago, and their feet are cold, I can just pick them up and carry them. So that's really good. And then I also have one cat at home. So the answer is yes. Animals are important in my life. They are what some people don't realize is that they're just forever forgiving. And even if something bad happens, they have a very short memory. They really do. They're just, Okay. I'll show you my animals next time. But I do, yes. Other questions that you may have, yes.
So my name's Christy, and
Hey,
it's been a
Christy.
pleasure to have both of you
Thank
here and
you.
here with us.
Thank you.
So first, as I mentioned before, just so moved by your book and touched by your writing style and
Thank
just
you.
everything about it. And I was
Yeah.
expecting it to be maybe dry, and I wasn't sure I'd be able to finish it.
Sure.
And it was, but sort of my amusing reading is mysteries. I just love.
I
to
like
just
mysteries too.
follow
I like
them.
mysteries
And
too.
When I get in them, I just go, go, go.
Yeah.
And that's the way your book was. So
Thank you.
thank you
Oh,
for
thank
that. I
you.
had a lot of connection with it that are in my life and family. Mental illness is a big
Yeah.
thing. I have a family member who died by suicide.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
tough.
there's a little bit of a weird thing, how, how life has these alignments
Connections,
from time to
yeah,
time.
yeah.
And I have never put antifreeze in my car my entire life. And I am dealing with a radiator issue right now. And then I picked up your book and
So you learn.
this is really
So
interesting.
yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, those are those connections.
So,
That's true.
But the question I wanted to ask, if
Uh-huh.
you would share a little bit. I was just waiting and waiting to learn a little bit more about you as a classical pianist.
Oh, sure.
And I wondered if you
Sure.
could share a little bit
Sure.
about that.
Sure.
Thank you.
So the answer is yes. So my mom sort of started me with piano, and believe it or not, I've had piano lessons my entire life. In fact, I just had one last Monday. So I love playing the piano. It allows me that sense of quiet and that sense of accomplishment on some other levels. When my life isn't working so well, I can accomplish other things that way. So I'm very much a Chopin fan. I wish I knew jazz. I'm amazed at people's mind who can put that together, but I cannot do that. But right now, yes, I'm doing the Fantasy Impromptu. I'm doing the Tempest, a sonata by Beethoven, and I'm doing some other nice things as well. So I love playing piano. We have a 7-foot grand piano in our house, and we used to have recitals once a year. Now, just when we have dinner or things like that, we will invite people over. The wonderful thing is we like to share. So what you don't know about Rose is that she's a singer. So we've got her to actually sing while we played piano at some of our recitals. So that's been
What
really
a treat.
wonderful. It's really good because you connect with people on a different level.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, I mean, I have good hearing, but for those people who don't have good hearing, I wonder what they gain, because I just love music, but they must gain something that's different from me. And I just wonder what that is. I haven't asked anybody yet, but they must have a different sensitivity there that brings them a different sense of peace in their mind.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a gift. And I always say that, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm not the one that came up with this, but it's so true that music touches us and speaks
It
for
does.
us in a
It
way that we
does.
can't do with words.
It
you know?
does. And when you can share it, when I can
Yes.
play it and share it, then it even means something
Yeah.
more intimate than
Thank
just
you.
listening to it.
And
So
I
thank
want to
you.
hear you sing.
Yes.
Hi, thank you both for being here. And
Thank you.
maybe this is a question for both of you, but is there something either you wish you knew before entering veterinary medicine, or that you would maybe tell a veterinary technician or veterinary student before entering the field or before entering school?
I don't know. Do you want to start since I've been leading it?
Wow. I would say just not to be too hard on yourself, and kind of ties in with what Jody said about learning and growing is
A process.
it's a process. It's not about
not
perfection. And sometimes we can be super hard on ourselves and just think, I should have done better, and I should have, it's about moving forward. It's always about moving forward. Yeah.
And for me, you should be asking your why. So, I mean, I entered veterinary medicine for a whole different reason, but there's one thing that I really learned, and especially since we're all learners in here, is I have a lot of sayings, and I'm sorry I do this, but that's sort of how I live my life. And I'd always have to tell people that what good is knowledge if it's not linked to caring? And so you need to think about that as you go through school all the time. So sometimes we think that knowledge is for the sake of knowledge, and it's not that way. But if you think about what good can you do and how you can put it to work, whether it's veterinary medicine or being the best computer person or being the best librarian, where you're helping people enjoy literature, what we need to do is keep that in mind, because as long as you have value in someone else's life, you also have value in your own. So that's how I like to think about it. And I try and tell my students that as well, so they don't get so worried, because, you know, if I ask a student what they really want in class, they always tell me wonderful things, but what I really know is what they want to know, what they're going to get on the test. I understand that, so I do. So I try and shift their mind a little bit, but I understand that their next goal is this test. So it's okay. You'll get it eventually.
We had one additional online question, and then maybe we'll
Sure.
end with this question over here. But what did Maude teach you?
Oh gosh. So people who've read the book, they sort of know what Maude taught me. She's the one in the photo. She's the one in the photo. I don't know. Again, that unconditional love is what she taught me. She taught me to share her love, because I took her to work every day. Those were the big things. And she just taught me a lot of forgiveness. She taught me just a lot of forgiveness. She was a wonderful dog. She really was. She really was.
We'll take this one final question.
Are there many African-American students in veterinary science at the U? And would you say a little bit about who they are?
Ooh, so that's a bit, the first question I can answer very easily. I think there's like maybe 2 or 3, but you know, as we grow and as we become more, how can I say, more mobile, sometimes I can't always identify them, which may be good. And even if they're not, you know, so they may have backgrounds that I don't completely see. I can't tell you a lot about them. I try and meet with them. Sometimes they're a little bit afraid to meet me, I think, because they think I'm this very important person. But what I do know is that they sort of think highly of me and rely upon me as a beacon or a role model. So I do know that, and I try and hook with them all the time. But I'm very cautious about making sure that I make them feel special in ways that are important. I don't want them to make them feel special in ways just for being a darker skin color. What they really need to do is feel special because they are unique and they are special, and they come with this ability to maybe offer things that maybe others don't. So I try and relate to all my students that way. Can I end, since we're going to do that? So it's okay. So first of all, I want to appreciate all you guys coming, and the questions were marvelous. You just don't know. The questions were marvelous. What I want to do is that some people don't realize that there are 3 gifts in my book. And again, as I mentioned before, sometimes if you don't need those gifts, you don't find them. But I think you'll at least find one. But I'm going to read all 3 of them for you, so that as you read the gift, you really can see it. So I'm going to read it. So, the gift of regret is not guilt, but self-correction. And you should see that in the book. I sort of self-corrected. The gift of failure is not defeat, but inspiration. I mean, my failures allowed me to really apply myself differently and move on. And probably the most important one, which I think will resonate with all of you, is that the gift of loss is not despair, but it's really empathy. Because having lost something, you understand another person's feeling when they lost something, and then you can create a deeper connection with them. And so that's really important to think about that, because all of these things are something that everyone in this room has gone through. Mm-hmm. And we not only need to think about that pain when it happened, but that joy when we can get beyond it. So thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoy the book. I really do. I really do. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
We do still have books for sale right over there. Wendy can help anyone out who is interested in purchasing. Thank you all so much.
You're welcome. And while we're getting off, I can certainly sign anybody's book as well. I know some people asked me.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to get rid of this right